Hello and welcome to Data Conversations over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. As always, I've got my cup of Seam from Third Space, my favorite coffee. And I'm joined this morning by Gershon Venkatsamy from Netcare, who is speaking on our DataCon Africa event coming up in May. Gershon, good to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gershon, I thought maybe
I've also got my...
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've also got my cup of tea here.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, good stuff. So I think it's whatever gets you going in the morning or the afternoon. Although we're kind of pro coffee on the show, I'm kind of pro whatever gets anybody going in the morning. So good to have you.
Absolutely.
Cool. So Gershon, what I thought we'd do is just maybe let the audience get to know you a little bit. I mean, our audience is quite a global audience, obviously quite heavy weighted to South Africa, but across the rest of the continent, Middle East, pretty much all over. It would be good to just let people know who you are, what it is that you do, and also let them understand a little bit about Netcare. Obviously, South Africans are very familiar with the brand, the healthcare brand behind it, but maybe you can take us through the data journey that you guys have been on.
Yeah, sure. So just a little bit about me. I've been in this industry for just over 20 years now. And I started back in '99 as a tech support guy. Didn't last very long in that role. Quickly moved into networking, and at Pfizer, which was my second employer, I got introduced to data and got involved in SQL. And back then it was Cognos, right? Which was the big reporting tool. And that was my introduction into data. So my journey kind of took me to a number of organizations along the way. I've gone to pharmaceuticals, banks, media houses, and eventually landed at Netcare now. And I must be honest, I'm really happy to be at Netcare. It's an awesome company to work for. They're really focused around the patient-centered, everything being around the patient. And that's something that really grabbed me, because joining a new company, normally the things you hear about is, listen, let's look at revenue, let's look at our financials. But everything I heard from the time that I joined was all around patients. And that for me is great, because it gets me excited getting to work every day. And it feels like I'm contributing to something that's really helping people on the ground, So Netcare, for that reason, I think it's really been a blessing to be working for them. And I'm loving what we're doing and what we're building towards. The organization as a whole, on their data journey, they've actually committed quite strongly to this whole data journey. And something that's been publicized a lot in the media is the K-On project, which they did, where they're actually digitizing the patient journey end to end. And that's an amazing game changer, because it'll give us the wealth of data that we can harness. And, obviously with having lots of data comes a lot of other responsibilities that we need to pay attention to. So obviously some of the things that are high on the agenda is obviously security, because we want to make sure that our patients' information is highly secure. And then things like data governance, which is a constant discussion. But the other thing that kind of changed through my career is when I started in this game, working in a data team or working in analytics was an IT function, but that's slowly becoming more merged with the business, and it's becoming more of a partnership. So through things like data councils and constant engagement with the business, we're making sure that we're both aligned and that we're building solutions together. So that's something that's really high on the agenda as well, making sure that what we're doing is not just IT tech guys doing cool stuff in the background, that's actually not adding value to the business. Because at the end of the day, it's all about business value. And at the end of the day, for Netcare, it's all about how it's going to benefit the patient.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very noble sort of profession that you guys are in, and obviously looking at that patient outcomes and the patient experience is incredibly important. And I suppose as well, to make sure that you're not getting where you can, like, repeat visits or anything like that. It's making sure that the first care really is doing the job. How did you get, we'll talk about culture quite a bit later on, but I'm always interested to know, sort of in a hospital or healthcare environment, there's so many different types of people within that organization. You've obviously got, your side of the business, you've got the operational, you've got the clinicians, you've got doctors, you've got nurses. It's a pretty, varied group of people. How have you got them all on board, sort of understand? I mean, doctors, you would say, and nurses, etc., inherently patient-centric. That's their oath. There's the outcome of the patient. Was it a challenge to get them sort of on board around the data side, the analytics side, the insights side? Was it something that they adopted pretty quickly?
So surprisingly not. I think the interesting thing about where we are currently is I think most people in the business actually understand how important data is to helping the organization. I mean, if you don't actually harness the data, and a lot of the time you're going to be flying blind. So the people we work with, even though they might be medical professionals and highly technical in their field, they still understand the importance of the data that we house and that we can harness for them. So we accept that they are the experts in their field, and in a lot of instances, they actually are the data owners because they actually understand the data better than we could ever understand it.
Yeah.
So that's why I made that statement earlier, that really it is a partnership, and we're constantly speaking all the time, and that conversation carries on, and our solutions are constantly evolving for that reason. It's never just a stagnant thing where you build a dashboard and it's published. That's a constantly evolving solution.
One of the things that we've been talking about on the last, the first two podcasts of this season really is, and last season, just to kind of put you in context, is that we talked a lot about data literacy from the business side to understand things around data governance, data quality, even the analytics side, the insights, etc. But this year we started to talk a lot more around business literacy of the data people, to understand the context of the business and the environment that HR is working in, finance is working in, emergency, radiology, etc. How have you found that people in your team have gone about understanding the business literacy or getting business literate in the medical profession? Because it's obviously not going to go into that sort of deep side, but how have you sort of allowed people to understand the context of the data that they're working in each environment?
So it's kind of interesting, the approach that Netcare takes, but when I had just joined, one of the activities was part of my orientation was to take us to a hospital. And they actually did a walkthrough of taking us through basically behind the scenes, of how this hospital functions. And it actually starts from very early on that you start getting exposure to this. And it's phenomenal because the guys that we have in our team are highly skilled, technically data-focused people, but we all have a very good understanding of how the operations work and how everything ties together. So the way that happens is by spending a lot of time with these professionals in the organization, and actually leveraging off the years of experience that they have and learning a little bit about their world. So, you asked about how the guys feel about it. Actually, everybody's pretty motivated, and everybody in the team just wants to learn more and more about these things. I mean, going into COVID now and fighting a pandemic, everybody just wants to get more involved and learn a little bit more and see where they can actually assist and help. So that really is the way the team feels, and I think all of us do. So I'm actually very blessed to have an amazing team of people that are highly motivated and very keen to learn. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, I guess the lesson there is to get the people in the data office really immersed in the business, that it's not something that is stuck away in a silo, that you're kind of just working from the outside or from the inside out, to actually go get people, walking around, involved in other areas of the business, understanding it. We talk a lot about co-creation of models. So it's not just the analytics team developing the models and then sort of forcing it onto business, but actually going to and doing it with business and saying, okay, let's understand what you really need from this data product.
Absolutely. It's not just about, like I said before, it's not just about building the model and then leaving it out there for it to run. It's also to go back to the business, assess the results, look at ways of improving, and that dialogue is a constant one. And it helps when you work with highly motivated people who are constantly obsessed with improving solutions. So yeah, I completely agree. That's a process that you have to have.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. I mean, it's probably a conversation doesn't go by without us touching on it from some degree. But I mean, you guys really are at the coalface, frontline workers, doing the absolute, most important work in terms of getting people recovered, etc. How has data played a role in that across the whole healthcare sort of ecosystem? Because obviously you've got, from government side, you've got public hospitals, you've got private hospitals, you've got now testing. Obviously now we've got the vaccine rollout. Data analytics must have played a pretty important role in managing and fighting this thing.
Yeah, so it's played a massive role. And, really, if you think about it, if you didn't have the data, we honestly would be flying blind. And if we just had to think about things like, like a hospital would need to know is occupancy, things like PPE, which has been high in the media recently, making sure that we have adequate stock, things like medication, oxygen supply. Those are some of the things that you absolutely need data on for you to make important life-saving decisions. I mean, bed availability, patient volumes, those are the types of things. But just in a global sense, it's absolutely amazing how data is playing a role in this. I mean, if you go into Google and you type in a search for the infection rate, you get this amazing curve, and that actually comes from like many countries feeding their data up to their various health or departments, and then that's getting to a central repository globally. And when you think about just the mechanism itself, that's a massive task to actually collate so many points of data and bring it all together. So I think just from that perspective, the fact that we can actually look at that graph on our phone at the tap of a button and it's up to date as of probably yesterday, for me is phenomenal. Because when you think about all the steps involved in that, the validation steps to make sure the data is accurate before you actually report it through, it's a mammoth task. Yes. So I think from a data sharing perspective, this has been phenomenal. I don't think we've ever seen anything at this scale before. And for me, that's just mind-blowing. But to take it a step further, I also see that a lot of organizations out there, healthcare organizations, are also using predictive models. And, a lot of the work is highly publicized, like things that John Hopkins is doing and Mount Sinai in the US. And they're using models to predict, this might sound a little morbid, but they're actually predicting the rate, the chance of survival, how long a patient will stay in hospital. So those are some of the things that the data is helping people predict. And when your hospitals are overwhelmed, that makes a massive difference, on the types of decisions you make. And these are decisions that will save a patient's life.
Yeah. In the private sector, really asked this question a lot, where data analytics in the organization was, we get it, we understand it, it's nice. There's still some of those hurdles around, getting people to trust the analytics, the insights, understand the importance of things like data quality and data governance. But sort of March last year, things changed quite quickly. I thought we need very accurate insights very quickly. Things are changing, almost needs to be real time. And the belief and trust and adoption of data analytics in the private sector, let's say the non-healthcare sector for this example, has sort of at quite a steep sort of curve, and that sort of adoption rate has stuck now. It's sustainable. Have you seen the same in the healthcare sort of environment in general, where maybe there was a little bit of slow adoption of data analytics using insights, and now because of the urgency and the sort of importance of the situation, doctors, healthcare departments, medical aides, etc., have really said, okay, we need to make use of this data? Or is it something that's always been there because it's so sort of life critical?
So it's kind of interesting. As much as I'd like to say there's been this radical change, there actually hasn't been, in my view. It's just that the focus has had to shift quite drastically. We actually had a lot of really exciting projects on the go, but those would now be considered nice to haves, and have kind of shifted to the back of the bus. And all the focus is now mainly on the pandemic and making sure that we're getting accurate data out and reporting that can help with decision making. So, I'm not sure if it's just a case of Netcare always had a very strong focus on data and the power of data. So I think from that perspective, we've been quite fortunate that they see the value in it. And for us, it's just been mainly a shift in focus and not so much a shift in the importance of data.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's move on, because I think we could talk about the pandemic for days, but I want to get into a few other topics. But before I do, a big shout out, huge respect to all the frontline healthcare workers out there, both public and private sector, globally. I saw a great thing on Instagram yesterday, which was a video by all the European tour golfers who were saying in their own languages, "I am not your hero." And obviously pointing to the fact that healthcare workers, etc., were, and I think, massive shout outs to everybody out there that's listening from the healthcare sector.
Absolutely. And I mean, they're in the front line. So that's something that really motivates us, is any small way that we can help to assist them is something we're happy to do. But really, they're in the front line. And I absolutely agree with you. You got to have massive respect for what these guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Gershon, let's move on to something that I know is very close to your heart, something that you're really passionate about, and that really is around leadership change and culture. And you were saying just before we started that you wrote a research paper on it. I find that through pretty much all the conversations I've been having for the last nearly 6 years in the data analytics space, so much of it comes back down to the culture, the people. How do you change sort of the hearts and minds and ways of working of people? And obviously it needs strong leadership. Maybe you can give us, sort of your take on it. And then what are some of the critical things people need to be aware of, take note of, try and change, try and instill in their organizations to kind of get to that point where, yeah, we've got all the fancy technology, but if you don't get the people part right, it's not really going to go anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very passionate about technology, but I think I'm even more passionate about people. And when I started out this research paper, I chose a company that was a data company. So the organization actually, data was their main asset. So it was very topical to my industry. And it's amazing. The things that I was looking at was mainly leadership, things like employee engagement, change, and the effect that that has as well on culture. And it's phenomenal, the results that came out. And it kind of correlates to a lot of the studies that have been done. But when you're looking at leadership going forward, you really need leadership that's going to create a safe environment where people feel that like they can contribute. And there always needs to be mutual respect. That's something I feel very strongly about. And this whole command and control mentality really is becoming a thing of the past. You need safe spaces, and that's where innovation flourishes. But the one thing people neglect is that you also need to hold people accountable. So a lot of people feel like, for you to create a safe environment and for there to be mutual respect, you need to be kind of a pushover, but that's actually not the truth at all. You need to hold your people accountable and give them feedback constantly. And that's something people actually appreciate. So whether it's good or bad, those conversations need to happen, and those difficult discussions need to happen. So that really is the type of environment that's going to drive organizations forward. And if you don't have those types of people employed, those types of leaders employed, it really is a recipe for disaster. It might not happen immediately, but it will happen over time. I've become fascinated with some of the stories in the media at the moment, and there's a company called CD Projekt Red, and they just developed a game, and the way that they managed their staff and the way that they communicated to the public was so bad. And there's actually a case study about it. It was actually on my last LinkedIn post, and it's amazing to read through this, because it shows exactly that. They created a culture of fear, and people were afraid to speak out. Their values were mixed up because they actually said things publicly that were not true. And when you do things like that, it could potentially damage your reputation, and that for me is quite is something you want to protect as an organization. You need to protect your reputation. Then looking at it from the other side, from the side of the employee, you also need people that are adaptable and are open to change. So, if you look through my LinkedIn profile, I've worked at a number of organizations, and it wasn't always by choice. I've gone through a number of retrenchment exercises, restructures, a whole host of things. And so you need to be okay with that, because the environment is going to change. That's an absolute. And I really feel like people that are okay with change will have, or change is always going to be hard for us. But I feel like people that are going to be more open to it will weather this a lot better. Now going into like this pandemic, we've been forced to work from home, and it's been a massive change for us. And the people that are handling this better are those that are more open to these types of changes. And also from an employee perspective, you need people that are willing to share knowledge and who are constantly wanting to learn. Because if you look at the tools and the tool sets, they're constantly changing and evolving. It's not like when I started in this industry where you learn Cognos and that's all you do. You become a specialist in it and you become a Cognos expert. The way things are moving in data at the moment, you have to constantly be learning new tools and tool sets. So
yeah. I mean, that change of people is always a challenging thing. I guess I got two questions around it. When you're recruiting, how do you sort of and I think people would like to know this. When you're recruiting, how do you spot those people or identify that they can be quite adaptable and change is not going to completely upset them and sort of make them freeze and you kind of like, oh, I need someone who's a little bit more sort of dynamic than that. And secondly, once you do have those people, how do you sort of keep them engaged in the change process? Because they might want things to be dynamic all the time. How do you keep them engaged? And guys, we've got to stay the course. This might be a 6-month project, a year-long project. So I guess the first bit is how do you identify those people? Secondly, once you've got them in, how do you keep them motivated and engaged?
So it's kind of interesting because we have quite a stringent hiring process, and we try to put a lot of effort into it at the outset and ask all the relevant questions. And it's amazing how these things come out, and there's certain questions we will ask around, somebody's eagerness to want to learn a new language or learn a new technology. And it's amazing how some people would actually say, no, actually, I'm not really interested in that, or I'm not open to that. And that for me becomes an immediate red flag. And, you really don't want somebody on your team that's not open to those types of things, because we don't really have the space for people that are not able to adapt and change for what the business requirements are. So that's a definite red flag, and it comes out in the interviews. The next thing is about how to keep people engaged, and quite honestly, once you start getting into a role, if you're doing the same mundane thing day in, day out, it does become very boring, and I do believe that people need a challenge to keep them fully engaged. So we do, once we have people in on the team, we constantly are trying to push them and stretch them, expose them to new things, not just new technologies, but also new solutions, get them involved in places where they're uncomfortable, because ultimately, when you face that challenge head on and you actually overcome it, it's an amazing feeling of accomplishment. So that's something we constantly do to keep people engaged. We try to change things up, make sure that they're getting more exposure, because quite honestly, that's the only way that you'll really grow.
Yeah. All right. Good tips there. One of the things I want to, I guess, sort of close off with, or sort of move towards the end of it, is really talk about the skills development life cycle, skills gap that people often talk about in the technology space. I mean, we do events in cybersecurity, and there's skills gaps there, and there's skills gaps in data, and all those sorts of. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how to get more people involved in this? Is there really a skills gap, or is it just not being able to identify where those skills are?
So I'd like to say there isn't a skills gap, but I think there is a skills gap, especially when we go to market. It's sometimes very difficult to recruit for certain roles, and we recently went to market for data engineers. And what we found is some of the candidates we interviewed, and we interviewed over 16 candidates and went through rigorous testing and interviews. And we found a number of the candidates, even though they were analysts, didn't really understand very basic relational concepts and how to construct very basic SQL. So there definitely, I feel there is a gap. But I feel that as leaders in the industry, we also have a responsibility to help to address that gap. So I myself have gotten involved in mentorships. Through that interview process, we gave through a technical test. And when we closed out that hiring process, we actually sent each of the candidates the model answers and even made an offer to them to say, listen, if you need further support in understanding this, or you want to learn more, you're more than happy to contact us and tap into our resources. Not from a organization perspective, but in my own personal capacity.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I feel like that's one way of addressing the skills gap. And I think it's an important one because, I mean, throughout my career, I've been very fortunate to have people help me along the way. Right from my first, my first job all the way to now. And, you can't do it all on your own. So I feel like you have to pay it forward. You have to get involved and start giving back to the community as well.
Okay, so I think sort of talking there is much more around, I guess, the technical side of things. The volume of people perhaps exists, but it's maybe the curricula, the coursework, etc., that it's maybe just not aligned to what business requires. Maybe there needs to be a bit more of a conversation between the education system and obviously what actually industry needs. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we test, we don't really test for code. So we don't want syntax, we don't want the guys to write the perfect code block. We're actually testing that the guys understand concepts, and we're really testing for logic.
Yeah.
And getting those concepts and building on that really is quite important. So I definitely think there might be a bit of a gap. But having said that, we were fortunate to find amazing people, and so there are highly skilled people out there. But I do feel like there are people that need a helping hand as well, and we're getting involved to try and help where we can.
Yeah. Do you think it? I mean, I see now, even at my daughter's nursery school, they offer more digital skills, even some kiddie coding. My son as well, who is turning 7 this month, a lot of digital literacy, etc. Do you think that there's enough through all levels of education that kids and then teens and then young adults are actually getting exposed to this? Because it's not an easy thing, the language, the logic, etc. It's not something that a lot of people have a natural aptitude for. But if it started really early, do you think that, it's a long sort of cycle, but do you think that will help? Do you think getting people just a bit more comfortable with sort of, I guess, the logic and even the coding side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really feel like those foundational basic concepts, if you can grasp those, it's a great building or great foundation to build on. So I definitely think it has a big role to play. I know with my nephew is also involved in some of this robotic stuff, and it really helps to get them thinking that way, because especially in the data space, we really look for people who love solving problems, and that type of personality, those problem solvers who just can't leave or put something down until they figured it out. Those are the types of people we desperately need. And I'm very fortunate because throughout my career, I've been able to work with those types of people. And I'm in a team that has those types of people at the moment. So I consider myself really lucky. But I absolutely agree with you. Having those foundational skills is definitely going to help develop that.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Before I let you go, Gershon, what I've been asking everybody on the show is what they see as the big trends in data analytics in 2021, and then I'll collate those, probably some for the first half of the year and then the second half. So just very briefly, you don't need to go into any detail, but what would you say are the sort of, in your opinion, the 2 to 3 really big trends in data analytics for this year?
You can get stuck in the technology. So, I mean, there's AI, blockchain, cloud, and those are things that we're definitely going to see more adoption of, and even more development in those spaces. I think the way that we present data to the business will change as well, where, business is currently analyzing the data in detail to get answers. We will probably be designing rather to present the answers rather than for them to analyze them. But for me, just bringing it home and looking at it on a more practical level, I think these traditional roles that we have of a data engineer will probably change. And, where people were used to using a specific tool set just to transform data, data engineers are now delving into the machine learning space. And some of the languages that guys are learning are things like Python. And with your cloud environment, the tool set is so diverse that you can actually leverage all of these different things. And we see it in like the Azure platform. If you're working in Data Factory, you can implement a Databricks model quite easily. So I feel like those lines are going to start to blur between these traditional roles that we saw. And really, going back to what we were talking about, if you're not somebody who's comfortable with change or learning new things, that's going to be a struggle for you. But I definitely think that's something that's going to happen and is already happening. Also from, we touched on it earlier, from a business and IT perspective, I really feel those lines are going to start getting blurred a lot more. And there's going to have to be a lot more interaction between business and IT to kind of form a closer bond. And data needs to be part of the organization's strategic agenda. And, some organizations still don't have a CDO. And I think that will become a vital function going forward, because data has to be on your agenda. And if it's not, I think you won't, it won't bode well for you. So I definitely feel like those are some of the things we'll see at a more practical level. Some of the things like the decision intelligence and the digital data marketplace, those things are happening and will continue to happen. The technologies like cloud and blockchain and AI will continue to develop and get better. But for me, on a practical level, that's what I'm looking at as the main changes going forward.
Yeah, good stuff. And I couldn't agree more around the chief data officer role. It's something I've been tracking very closely, and I sort of count now, just purely based on a LinkedIn search, over 40 chief data officers in South Africa, which has grown a lot. So I think obviously there's a lot more than 40 companies out there, so it's still a very long way to go, but I think it certainly is getting higher up the corporate agenda. So Gershon, thank you so much for joining me and for your insights and for sharing your passion and enthusiasm for data, and then obviously more the leadership and people side of things.
Thanks so much, Craig. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Yeah, likewise. Keep well.